The small village of Lombo was tucked away between rolling hills, its dirt roads winding like the veins of the earth. It was a place where everyone knew each other's name and their business was never too far behind. The community, though close-knit, was bound by traditions that often stifled the individual. Here, social status wasn't just a reflection of wealth, but a measure of one's worth. The higher your family's position, the more respect you commanded, and the more power you wielded. In this village, Siti had lived her entire life, under the shadow of her stepmother, Mima. Siti's mother had passed away when she was just a child, leaving her vulnerable to the whims of a woman who was nothing like the gentle soul who had raised her. Mima, cold and calculating, had swept into the family with the authority of a queen, and her husband, Siti's father, had done little to stop her. Although he loved his daughter dearly, he was weak, easily manipulated by Mima's harsh words and sharp gaze. Siti had grown up under Mima's oppressive rule, the house feeling more like a prison than a home. The air was thick with tension, and the only time Mima smiled was when she had succeeded in punishing Siti for some imagined slight. It wasn't just the physical chores that Siti resented, it was the constant feeling of being less than, of never being good enough in her stepmother's eyes. Mima often reminded her that her late mother had not been able to give her a future worthy of respect, but that Siti could make something of herself, if only she were to obey her stepmother's demands. Despite the constant criticism, Siti had always remained humble and obedient, her dreams of escape kept alive only by the small spark of hope that one day someone would see her for who she truly was, not as Mima's servant, but as a young woman deserving of love and respect. But in a world where women's worth was tied to their marriages, Siti knew that her dreams would remain just that, dreams. Her father had failed to protect her, and Mima's cruelty was a daily reminder of the reality she could never escape. That was until Juma entered her life. He was poor. Everyone in the village knew that. But unlike the men who came to seek Siti's hand for their own selfish reasons, Juma didn't care about her dowry or the prestige she could bring. His charm lay in his simplicity. His kindness was evident in his every action. Siti had first met Juma at the annual harvest festival, where he had helped her carry a basket of grain she'd dropped while trying to navigate the crowded market. Their eyes had met briefly, but something shifted in that moment. An unspoken understanding, a quiet recognition of two souls who longed for something more than the lives they were trapped in. Though Juma was far from wealthy, there was a gentleness in him that Siti had never known. He was hard-working, honest, and above all, he treated her with respect, something her stepmother had never done. Over the following weeks, they found themselves in each other's company more often, and what started as a simple friendship quickly blossomed into something deeper. The connection between them was undeniable, though Siti knew better than to believe it would be enough to change her life. Her father, who was unaware of the full extent of Mima's cruelty, was overjoyed at the idea of Siti marrying. He saw Juma as a kind and decent man, despite his poverty, and he encouraged the union. But when Mima found out, her fury knew no bounds. How could Siti, her only daughter, marry a man with nothing to his name? The match was beneath them, and Mima would not stand for it. The pressure mounted, and the conflict in Siti's heart began. On one hand, she longed for freedom, a life without the harsh rule of her stepmother. On the other, she knew that Mima would make life unbearable for her if she went against her wishes. She was caught between her desire for love and independence and the relentless weight of her stepmother's expectations. Siti's heart raced as she sat in the small, dimly lit room, the weight of her stepmother's words pressing down on her. Mima's face was rigid, her eyes sharp with the coldness of someone used to having their way. "You will marry Juma," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Your father has already agreed and there's no turning back. You owe this to the family." Siti's mind spun, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear and confusion. She had always known her stepmother's intentions, But now it was becoming painfully clear. Mima had manipulated her father into agreeing to the marriage, using his weakness to her advantage. Siti had tried to protest, to explain her feelings, but Mima's grip on her father was unshakable. In a family where power was held by the strongest, Siti's quiet pleas had never been enough to sway her father. He simply nodded, too passive to challenge Mima's plans, too eager to keep the peace. "Father," Siti had begged, her voice trembling, "I don't want this. I don't want to marry him." But her father had only sighed, his face full of regret. "Your mother would have wanted you to have a good life. Mima is right. Juma may not have much, but he's a good man. You'll learn to love him." The words stung like a slap. Siti knew her father meant well, but he didn't understand. He didn't see the cruelty that Mima inflicted on her every day. He didn't understand that the life she dreamed of wasn't one of mere survival, but of happiness, of being treated as a person and not just a tool to further their family's ambitions. And so, she found herself trapped. The village's traditions, her father's naivete, and Mima's unwavering determination all worked together to force her into a decision she couldn't escape. The pressure was unbearable. Siti longed to rebel, to escape the oppressive hold her stepmother had on her life, but she knew that to refuse the marriage would mean an even worse fate, Mima's wrath, which no one could withstand. But despite her outward compliance, there was a fire burning inside Siti, a quiet rebellion that she nurtured in secret. She had already decided that she would marry Juma, not out of love, but out of a desperate desire to escape Mima's cruelty. She was willing to marry into poverty, to live a life without wealth or luxury, if it meant finding a place where she could be free from the daily torment of her stepmother's manipulation. In the dark corners of her mind, Siti had already pictured a life with Juma. A simple life, yes, but one where she could live in peace. She could be with someone who saw her for who she was, not as a burden or a tool to climb the social ladder. The thought of being with him, even if it meant enduring a life of struggle, was a dream she clung to, like a lifeline. The simple joy of being loved, without fear or manipulation, was worth more than any material wealth. But Mima would not let go so easily. The moment she learned of Siti's growing affection for Juma, her fury knew no bounds. Mima had always expected a marriage that would elevate the family's social standing, one that would bring wealth and prestige to their household. Juma, with his humble background, was nothing more than an obstacle to her plans. With her sharp tongue and cunning mind, Mima set out to sabotage the wedding. She spread rumors about Juma's family, whispering to anyone who would listen that he was nothing more than a poor, illiterate peasant. She went so far as to suggest that Siti was making a terrible mistake, that she would regret this decision for the rest of her life. "Are you really willing to marry someone who has nothing?" she would say, her voice dripping with contempt. "What kind of future could you possibly have with him? No house, no land, no respect." Mima's words were like poison, and they spread through the village like wildfire. The more she spoke, the more doubt crept into Siti's mind. The fear of rejection, of losing the approval of the community, gnawed at her. She had been taught all her life to value the opinions of others, to believe that her worth was tied to the respect of the people around her. But despite Mima's efforts, something inside Siti refused to break. She didn't care about the whispers anymore. The thought of a life with Juma, where she could live freely and love without fear, was more powerful than any rumor or judgment. As the wedding day approached, the tension grew unbearable. Siti could feel the walls closing in around her, but she held on to her secret desire like a precious secret. She would marry Juma, yes, but it was not just because she had to. It was because she needed to. She needed to take control of her own life, to live a life where she was the one making the choices, not Mima, not anyone else. But Juma, too, had his own secret, one that he had kept hidden from Siti even as their love blossomed. Though he appeared to be nothing more than a humble man, poor in the eyes of society, he was not entirely as he seemed. Juma came from a family with a long history, a family whose wealth had been lost due to betrayal and tragedy. His past was a shadow he had worked hard to escape, and he had promised himself that he would never reveal the truth to anyone, especially not to Siti. He didn't want her to love him for what he could offer, but for who he truly was. But soon, secrets would come to light, and the truth of Juma's lineage would change everything, both for Siti and her stepmother, who had no idea just how far beneath her she had fallen in the eyes of the man her daughter was about to marry. Siti's future was on the cusp of change, but the road ahead was fraught with tension, lies, and unexpected revelations that none of them could have predicted. The wedding day arrived, the sky a pale blue, the sun beating down with a warmth that Siti had never felt before. It wasn't the grand affair Mima had hoped for, nor did it carry the pomp and circumstance of the marriages that took place in the village's wealthier households. The ceremony was simple, humble even. But to Siti, it was everything. She wore a modest white dress that had been stitched together by the local seamstress, a far cry from the extravagant gowns Mima had envisioned for her. But the dress was hers, and in that moment it symbolized her choice, her escape. Juma, though dressed in his best, was a man of few resources, and his wedding attire reflected that. His clothes were plain, but there was a quiet pride in the way he carried himself. As they exchanged vows, his eyes locked on hers, and for the first time in years, Siti felt seen, not as the poor, unwanted daughter of a cruel woman, but as a woman deserving of love. She could feel the weight of Mima's disapproval hanging heavily over them, but in that moment it felt insignificant compared to the love and warmth she found in Juma's gaze. Mima, sitting on the far edge of the ceremony, had made her displeasure known in no uncertain terms. Her cold stare was a silent accusation, a reminder that no matter how much Siti might try to change her life, she could never truly escape the judgment of her stepmother. The guests, mostly friends and family from Juma's village, whispered among themselves, their glances filled with curiosity and speculation. Many of them had expected a much grander affair, but they said nothing, respecting the couple's wishes for simplicity. After the vows were exchanged, Siti and Juma left the ceremony and made their way to their new home, a small, modest house nestled on the edge of the neighboring village. It was humble, with a thatched roof and a single room that doubled as both bedroom and kitchen, but to Siti it felt like paradise. The air was fresh, the sound of birds chirping a welcome melody, and for the first time in her life, Siti was free to make her own choices. She wasn't subject to Mima's oppressive rules or the silent, weak support of her father. She was finally her own person, in charge of her own fate. The first few days in their new home were filled with a mixture of hard work and quiet moments of peace. Juma worked in the fields, doing what he could to provide for them, while Siti took care of the house, preparing meals, and making the home as warm as she could. Though the work was exhausting, there was a sense of fulfillment in it that Siti had never known. There was no one to dictate her every move, no one to criticize her for her efforts. Juma never once complained about the smallness of their home or the simplicity of their life. Instead, he encouraged Siti, praising her for the care she put into their daily routines. Siti began to realize that the love Juma offered her was genuine, not born from obligation or societal expectation, but from a deep, heartfelt connection. There were moments when Juma would look at her, his eyes soft, and Siti felt as though she were the only person in the world. He listened when she spoke, and though they had little, he made her feel as though they had everything. She had never known love like this before, love that was not tainted by cruelty or manipulation. However, as the days turned into weeks, Siti began to notice things that unsettled her. Juma, though always kind and attentive, was not completely open about his past. On several occasions, she saw him receive letters that he would carefully hide, often quickly slipping them into his coat pocket or tucking them under his mattress before City could see. He would act as though nothing was amiss, but there was an air of unease about him whenever these mysterious letters arrived. Sometimes, after reading them, he would sit quietly for hours, staring out into the distance, as if lost in thought, waiting for something or someone. City didn't press him. She respected his privacy, not wanting to intrude on a past that seemed important to him. After all, she had her own secrets. Memories of a life with Mima, the scars that lingered, and the dreams she kept close to her chest. She had never wanted to know too much about Juma's history, believing that what mattered was the present they were building together. Yet the more she thought about it, the more curious she became. She could sense there was more to Juma than met the eye, but for now she chose to let it rest. She was content with the life they had, the love they shared. Meanwhile, Mima had not forgotten about City. Despite the distance between them, she had not ceased her attempts to undermine her daughter's happiness. Her bitterness grew with each passing day, and the rumors she spread about City's marriage reached the ears of everyone in the village. Mima would tell anyone who would listen that City had married beneath herself, that Juma was a poor, illiterate man who would only drag her down. She suggested to anyone who would lend an ear that City was making a huge mistake, that she would soon regret her decision to marry him. But Mima's interference didn't stop there. She began to approach the local elders, trying to convince them that City's marriage to Juma was a mistake, a poor, ill-advised union that needed to be annulled. She used every ounce of influence she had to persuade the elders that the match was beneath their station, that City had been coerced into it against her will. The elders, however, were not so easily swayed. They knew City's strength of character, the way she had always handled herself, even under Mima's harsh rule. They knew that this was a decision she had made for herself, and they had no intention of stepping in. Still, Mima's malice knew no bounds. She was relentless, refusing to accept that City had found happiness in a life outside her control. Her anger and jealousy boiled over with every rumor she spread, every word of dissent she whispered. It was as though she could not bear the thought of her stepdaughter living a life free from her influence. Despite all this, City and Juma's life together remained relatively peaceful. The small home they had built was filled with love, and City began to realize that while their life may have been simple and humble, it was all they needed. The bonds of their love were stronger than any rumors, and though Mima's malice lingered like a shadow, City knew that she had finally found the freedom she had longed for. A freedom that, no matter what Mima did, could not be taken away. The quiet life City had begun to build with Juma was shattered one evening when an unexpected visitor arrived at their modest home. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the small house, when a tall, well-dressed man appeared at their door. His appearance was striking. His clothes were fine, his posture straight, and his eyes held a certain confidence that made City uneasy. Juma, who had been sitting with her by the fire, stood up immediately when the man entered. "City, this is someone from my past," Juma said, his voice calm but tense. The man, with an air of quiet authority, introduced himself as Hassan, a former confidant of Juma's from a time long ago. "I've come with news," Hassan said, his voice low and measured, "news that can no longer stay hidden." City exchanged a glance with Juma, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Juma's face remained impassive, but City noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders. She had learned over the past months that Juma was a man of few words, and when he was on edge, it was because of something serious. Hassan, without further hesitation, turned his gaze to City. "Juma," he began, "is not who he has led you to believe he is. His family, his true family, is not the humble one you know. In fact, Juma is the rightful heir to a vast estate, one that has been kept from him for years." City's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Juma, trying to process the words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Juma, what is this? What is he talking about? Juma remained silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving Hassan's. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but full of resolve. It's true, he said. I come from a family of wealth and power, a family with lands and influence. But due to a betrayal, I was exiled and stripped of everything. My family's name was dishonored, and I had to disappear for our safety. The weight of his words sank in. Siti stood frozen, unable to process the enormity of what she was hearing. Juma, the man she had married, the man she had thought was nothing more than a humble, poor farmer, was the heir to a fortune. The man she had once believed had nothing to offer her beyond his love, now stood before her as someone with an entirely different future, one that could change everything. Hassan continued, his voice carrying the weight of years of silence. Juma's father, the late lord of a large estate, was betrayed by a close relative. A cousin who had been trusted with the family's wealth sought to seize it for himself. That cousin turned his back on Juma's family, resulting in their downfall. Juma's family was forced into hiding, and he lived in exile to protect not only himself, but the honor of his name. For years he's kept this secret, thinking it would only bring more danger to him and to the ones he loved. Siti was speechless. The man standing before her, the man she had shared a humble life with, was someone of immense significance. He had concealed this truth not just from her, but from the entire world, including Mima, who had no idea who her daughter had really married. To her, Juma had always been just a poor man, a man who had no place in the world of the rich and powerful. But now, everything had changed. Siti turned to Juma, her mind spinning with questions. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why keep such a secret from me?" Juma sighed, his eyes filled with regret. "I wanted to tell you, Siti, but I knew the truth would only complicate things. I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I might have been. I didn't want you to be weighed down by the expectations and the dangers that come with my family's name. The past is full of shadows, and I didn't want you to be dragged into it." Siti looked down at the floor, processing the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She had married Juma, not knowing who he truly was, believing that their love was built on the foundation of mutual respect and equality. Now, she saw that their lives were about to be irrevocably changed. But it wasn't just their lives that would change. The news of Juma's true identity would shake the very foundation of her relationship with Mima. For years, Mima had dismissed Siti as the poor daughter of a weak man, someone who had no prospects and no future. She had schemed and manipulated Siti into a marriage that would elevate their social status. But now, all of that seemed trivial in the face of Juma's newfound power. Mima's carefully laid plans to marry Siti off to a wealthy man were suddenly rendered meaningless. She had been so sure that she could use Siti to climb the social ladder, to improve her own standing. But now she was faced with the stark reality that Siti had already married into a much higher position of power, one that Mima could never have imagined. The next day, the village was abuzz with the news. Hassan's visit had set everything in motion. Siti's marriage to Juma, once seen as a poor match, was now the talk of the village. Word spread quickly, and soon everyone knew that Juma was the rightful heir to a vast estate. People who had once looked down on Siti and her humble life now looked at her with new eyes, eyes filled with respect, awe, and perhaps even a hint of envy. Siti, still reeling from the revelation, felt an overwhelming wave of mixed emotions. On one hand, she was proud of Juma for his resilience, for the strength he had shown in hiding his true identity for so long. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted too quickly, too radically. She had never asked for wealth or power. All she had wanted was a simple, peaceful life with the man she loved. Now that life seemed out of reach, consumed by the weight of new expectations and responsibilities. As for Mima, the power shift was just beginning. The woman who had once been so sure of her control over Siti's life The woman who had tried to dictate her every move now found herself powerless in the face of the truth. Mima's dreams of using City to climb the social ladder had been dashed, and now she had to reckon with the fact that the man City had married was not just a poor farmer, but a man of significant status. The winds had shifted, and now it was City who held the power, whether she wanted it or not. The question remained, would she be able to navigate this new world? A world where she was no longer just the poor daughter of a powerless man, but the wife of a man who could change the fate of their entire village. Mima's reaction to Juma's revelation was nothing short of explosive. The moment she learned of his true identity and the immense wealth that was now tied to him, a deep, gnawing jealousy took root in her heart. For years, she had worked tirelessly to manipulate situations, to control her stepdaughter's fate, and to secure a better life for herself through City's marriage. But now, the very man she had so scorned was more powerful than she could have ever imagined. Her jealousy burned with a new intensity, one that was far more dangerous than before. Mima began spreading rumors, claiming that it was her influence over City that had somehow led to Juma's success. She boasted to anyone who would listen that her guidance had shaped City into the woman she had become, and that, if it weren't for her, City would never have married such a powerful man. The villagers, who had always viewed Mima as the matriarch of the household, began to listen, some with admiration, some with disbelief. But the truth had already begun to surface, and no amount of Mima's manipulation could hide it for long. The villagers, who had once feared Mima's sharp tongue and cunning ways, began to talk amongst themselves. The truth about Juma's past, his exile, and his rightful claim to wealth and power was now known far and wide. No one was buying Mima's claims anymore, and whispers of her cruelty towards City spread like wildfire. It was Juma who finally had enough. His patience, which had always been his strength, had reached its breaking point. One evening, he called Mima to the small courtyard outside their home. The air was thick with tension as City watched from a distance, unsure of what would unfold, but feeling the weight of the moment. Juma, now standing tall and proud, confronted Mima in front of the villagers who had gathered to see what would happen. "Mima," Juma began, his voice steady but filled with authority. "You have used your position in this family to control and manipulate, not just me, but City as well. You've made her life a living hell, pushed her into a marriage she didn't want, and forced her to live under your cruelty. You took advantage of her kindness, her patience, and her loyalty, and for that, I will not remain silent any longer." The villagers watched in stunned silence. Mima's face turned a deep shade of red, her usual composure shattered. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but Juma continued without hesitation. "You are the reason she had to endure so much pain. You're the reason she never knew what it was like to be truly loved and cared for. But no more. The power you once held over us is gone." His words struck like a blow, each one exposing the hidden truths that Mima had tried so hard to bury. The villagers, who had once respected her, now looked at her with suspicion and disdain. What had once been seen as her strength, her cunning, was now recognized for what it truly was: manipulation, cruelty, and greed. Mima, whose world had always revolved around maintaining control, was now being exposed for all her faults. Her attempts to defend herself only made things worse. She tried to twist the situation in her favor, claiming that Juma was ungrateful and that it was she who had raised City with love and care. But no one was buying her lies anymore. The villagers began to question everything they had ever known about Mima. They began to remember the stories they had heard about her sharp tongue, her harsh treatment of City, and the way she had manipulated her father. As the days passed, Mima's once strong influence in the village began to crumble. People who had once feared her now saw her for what she truly was. Her manipulation no longer held sway over the community, and the respect she had commanded evaporated like mist in the morning sun. The elders, once her allies, began to distance themselves from her. Her attempts to sway their opinions or gain their support only backfired. making her appear all the more desperate. The villagers, who had once been too afraid to stand up to Mima, now openly criticized her. Her authority had been stripped away, and her cruel nature was no longer tolerated. She had no friends left, no allies, and no influence. The woman who had once been the dominant figure in the village now found herself ostracized, her name whispered with scorn behind her back. City, who had once feared her stepmother's power, now watched as Mima's life began to unravel. The woman who had caused her so much pain and hardship was being forced to face the consequences of her actions. For the first time in years, City felt a sense of peace. She had escaped the clutches of Mima's cruelty, and with Juma's love and support, was finally able to live the life she had always dreamed of. As for Mima, her downfall was swift and unforgiving. The wealth and power she had sought for so long through manipulation and deceit now seemed like distant dreams. The truth of her character was undeniable, and the village had no place for her anymore. Her life, once filled with schemes and plans to elevate her status, was now a hollow shell, as empty as the lies she had built her life upon. And so, Mima's reign of terror came to an end, not with the grand plans of wealth and status she had hoped for, but with the quiet, undeniable truth of her own cruelty. The village had rejected her, and she was left to face the consequences of a life built on manipulation and deceit. With the truth now fully revealed, City's life blossomed into something she had never thought possible. No longer trapped by the oppressive control of her stepmother or the constraints of a poor, powerless life, she stepped into a future full of possibilities. Her marriage to Juma, once seen as a poor, desperate choice, was now celebrated as a union based on mutual respect, love, and the strength of character. Juma, her partner, was no longer just the humble man she had married. He was a man of wealth, history, and honor, and together they were a force to be reckoned with. City's heart, once burdened with the weight of her stepmother's cruelty and societal expectations, was now light. She found joy in the simple moments with Juma, working together on their land, planning for their future, and enjoying the peace of their small home. She had everything she had ever wanted: love, respect, and the freedom to make her own choices. Her dreams, once stifled by her stepmother's tyranny, began to take shape, and she looked forward to the future with hope and confidence. The villagers, who had once whispered behind her back and questioned her choices, now saw her in a completely new light. City had risen from the ashes of her difficult past to become a symbol of resilience and empowerment. They admired her strength and the courage she had shown in the face of hardship. What they had once seen as a marriage to a poor man, they now recognized as a testament to the power of love and true partnership. She was no longer the weak, oppressed girl they had once known. She was a woman who had carved out her own path and fought for her happiness. City's transformation, from a girl trapped by circumstance to a woman of strength and dignity, became an inspiration to others. Her journey proved that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in the courage to stand up for oneself, to love unconditionally, and to never allow anyone, no matter their position in society, to dictate one's worth. As for the future, City and Juma's life together was filled with promise. They continued to build their home, not just of stone and wood, but of dreams and shared love. Their bond was unbreakable, and with the respect of the villagers and the love they shared, they were unstoppable. Together, they had shown that love, truth, and resilience were the greatest treasures anyone could possess. And in the end, that was all they truly needed to build a life full of joy, respect, and fulfillment.